I'll go ahead and call our June 2nd, 2021 Joint School Services Committee meeting to order. Per the agenda, we have some approval of last meeting minutes. So, Ms. Armentrout sent that out on the 31st, so I'll give everybody a moment or two to refresh on the minutes from last meeting, and then I'll entertain motions to either approve or amend.
Make a motion to approve.
Okay, a motion to approve by Mr. Garten. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Tucker. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Moving on then to invoices. We do have Mr. Witt had submitted his May invoice, and I hope everyone was able to review that this morning after it was sent out. So again, I'll give everybody just a moment to refresh on that if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, and then entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion for approval.
A motion by Ms. Preston. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Garten. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, very good. Thank you very much. The last bit of invoices, I do want to let the committee be aware. I'll go back before I tell a lie here, but I believe several weeks ago, back the 1st of May, we did in fact receive another invoice from the folks at Troutman. So basically where we're at right now, we've had a little bit of correspondence with those folks via email. I believe our next step is going to be to set up a phone call with them to see if we can get on the same page here. Happy to take any questions about that from the committee. Still working through some of that. Yes, ma'am, Mr. Knight.
So I thought we had discussed a few meetings back about sending a formal letter ending the relationship with Troutman Pepper in an effort to then also prevent some of the what seems to be continuous billing and at times duplicate billing. Did we not send a letter? I thought there was a consensus on that.
Well, I think there was. This, however, is things dating back to previous work.
So at what point are we going to draw, and I'm sorry to cut you off, at what point are we going to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, General Assembly session ended on X date, we're at the end of a fiscal year, all of X dollars have technically been expended that we were allocated by the state for the initial consolidation work, all invoices have to be received by X date. Right. So we need to draw a line in the sand and kind of say that, because it just, and I'm sure Griff shares my frustration that it just every time we turn around, there's an invoice. And it's something 3 months ago or something 3 days ago, but that makes it very hard for us as we're trying to create that path forward.
Right. The two invoices that were received, one of them was adjusted. It was a November of 2020 invoice. The other was a March of 2021 invoice. Now, by my own calculations, both prior to and then just reviewing it surface level when it came in, was that it contained at least several charges that we've already taken care of in prior invoices. So that's why I think from an email standpoint, things can get done that way. I had some confusion as to the November invoice when I took a look at it. The totals of both invoices, they had identical invoice numbers, but the grand totals are different from the original November invoice that we received in, I'm supposing, the second week of November, to the one that they resubmitted to us, counting adjustments that we had already paid. And that came from the last set of invoices that we paid to Troutman. So again, I think there's quite a bit of clarification that's going to have to be had on that, and it will probably take more than emails. Mr. Wright was able, because the county board is the fiscal agent, he did talk with Ms. Bess and all the finance folks there the last time he was at the school board office. So we're trying to get every set of eyeballs on it that we can to make sure we can all get a good understanding of what it is they think we still owe. But the initial reaction, I think, for everybody that's taking a look at it is that's not correct. What they said. We'll continue to work with that. But Crystal, your point about drawing that line there, I think we passed that point for sure. But I will say we haven't received any invoices for any work that went beyond when we initially kind of wrapped things up and had to understand it. So.
If we withhold payment pending audit or something like that, until we figure out what's going on, send them some kind of notification that we aren't going to pay until then.
Right. It's certainly the pleasure of this committee as to what we do. My thinking of this is once we were able to communicate with Troutman a little quicker, real-time phone call, whatever the case may be, Zoom call, we will report back to this body what the total of that is and whether anything is owed. But I think the burden of proof is on them to show that we...
Yeah, but I guess what I'm just saying is, why don't we just send them a letter saying that, any and all invoices for work to date needs to be received, whether adjusted or whatnot, by June 30th, 2021. Right. I mean, everybody's still working to close out their fiscal year, so that also has an impact on, the county school board office too, for accounting purposes and everything, just for transactional efforts. Work's winding down, so they need to remit anything by June 30th.
Okay. I don't have any objection to that. Does anyone else have any problem with just sending a... Okay.
Jonathan, March has always been a sticky spot there. I mean, what work did they do in March?
For this particular invoice, let's see here. Make sure I'm cashing it. The March invoice was primarily the AECOM, what was left of basically a cash advance on their part to AECOM, which, again, from my going through the invoices prior to this, we've already accounted for that AECOM payment previous to what they just sent. So that's, again, there's a fair amount of confusion still with this, so I think the burden to me is on them to show us where these charges haven't been paid. If you recall, any of you all that didn't do yourself a favor and poured through that November invoice we were speaking of, that was the largest invoice that we received the entire time. That was initially a $106,000 invoice, but it contained a lot of their work plus some cash advances, and the largest cash advance that was contained in that invoice was to the architectural firm for their assessment of the facilities, and that's a $55,000 charge that was there. So, by my own calculations, again, when we went through this several months ago, I believe I identified a place where we had already taken care of that large cash advance that they did on our behalf. So, we'll do our best to draft a letter up just to formally make sure everybody's on the same page that we're cutting this off now as far as or goes back several months actually, and then do our best to work through this and report back to the group. I'm more than open to any other suggestions or ideas you have, but I think just a good series of communications with the folks there, hopefully we can get this resolved. Well, with that then, no more questions on that front. Brings us to our subcommittee reports, which should be kind of the meat and potatoes of our meeting today. I'll start off with the governance subcommittee was able to meet back on the 18th, I believe it was, off the top of my head. And what we, and I may lean on you here in just a moment, but Ms. Halterman had a contact at Lynchburg College, a very reputable and experienced fellow who we thought might be able to give some guidance and give us a hand on emerging school manuals, policy manuals, I should say. So the governance committee just asked that Ms. Halterman and Ms. Sneak Johnson maybe reach back out to that gentleman. We'll go a little bit further there. We do have some luxury of time, I think, on the policy manual front. So it's not a super high pressure item, but it's certainly one that we have to get done and not want to kick that can too far down the road. So Kim, did you have anything to add to that for the rest of the group?
That pretty much summarizes it. We're following up again this week with the individual at University of Lynchburg, so that should go well.
Okay, very good, and thank you for that. Appreciate your time there. The Finance Subcommittee, Mr. Griffith and I have spoken just today, as a matter of fact, and I think we've identified some of the more pressing issues the Finance Subcommittee needs to take a look at. So we'll be sending out an email, hopefully to get a meeting of that subcommittee next week at the participants' nearest convenience. So we have been able to kind of talk, as I said, about some priorities, because as we saw from Mr. Witt's task list, a lot of that initial work that we've identified will fall on the Finance Subcommittee, so it will be incumbent upon us to prioritize that correctly, because there are not enough hours in the day, I think, as you all know. So, that's sort of where those two subcommittees are at. Let's see here. I think as far as curriculum and things, Kim, Melinda, do you guys want to give the rest of the group a little bit of an update of where we are there?
Yes, and Kim, please join in. Kim and I have had multiple meetings discussing curriculum and moving forward, and we had a conversation with Mr. Wright and Mr. Aaron back a few weeks ago. And we'd like to move forward with the process of engaging stakeholders, our human resources department and our central office administrators to work on curriculum needs for the joint division. I actually sent Jonathan an email from outlining a memo from Kim and I this morning, and if you'd like to share that with the group, we're fine with that. We have a timeline of June and July 2021 involving stakeholders to provide feedback on our curriculum strengths and needs. We like to survey the preschool to grade 6 instructional staff, the grade 7 to 12 instructional staff, survey parents in both divisions, and survey the community. Now, we're not sure if it's going to be an actual survey or just conversations with the different stakeholders. Then in July and August, we would like to provide those survey findings to the Joint Schools Committee, the instructional staff, and possible have Zoom meetings with the stakeholders seeking input from the survey results. August to December, we'd like to conduct meetings with the instructional staff to further assess our possible curriculum strengths and needs. In January 2022, our hopes is to present a timeline to the Joint Committee for recommendation to both school boards. And then Kim has a couple of extra thoughts, and if she'd like to think and add what we also think might be necessary to involve as many stakeholders as possible. So, Ms. Alderman?
Yeah, I think that was a great summary. Thank you so much for sharing. We were talking about trying to develop a general plan for a lot of these types of tasks that we'll have to accomplish, where we can make sure that we're involving stakeholders at every step of the way, every turn. We just talked about how important we felt like that was, just to make sure we got all the good ideas that are out there in the community. We're certain everybody can't be at every meeting or participate in every survey or have every opportunity. We're really trying to be very, very thorough. Was that the information you needed?
Yes, and this also might involve professional development plans and this development of this work that we need to do. And we do need to assess the instructional materials and techniques that we currently use in CTE, special ed, regular K-12 instruction. So there's a lot of tasks ahead, but we have developed a Google Doc, and we are working with all of our administrators to start this process before our staff goes home for the summer, the end of June. And then we work that group in August when they return to open the 21-22 school year. So that's our update.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, do we have any questions about that? There was a lot there. And any questions from Melinda or Kim? Okay, well, certainly do appreciate your time and efforts on that, sincerely. It's, as we have said before in previous meetings, and I have said specifically, having been able to listen to some of the curriculum subcommittee meetings all throughout this process. It literally is what we're here to do. So we appreciate you guys and your expertise on that. So just let us know, let this group know whatever we all can do to give you a hand in that regard. We're happy to do so. I think, Mr. Garden, did you have an update for athletic subcommittee?
I did. I had an interesting update. Some things that came out of our meeting, I guess last Wednesday, our previous meeting. Mr. Whip was in attendance for that also, and our group was responsible for looking at a new name for the school system. What came out of that after last week was looking at maybe keeping the original names, and that was just a thought process that came out of that. I'm just reporting back. There was some artwork done by BSN just to see what it looked like. That's pretty much where we're at right now. Another thing that came out of that was that there needs to be a joint meeting between athletics and facilities and probably athletics and curriculum was what we wanted to look at.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Garden. And I think your point about multiple subcommittees meeting together, I know you and I have talked about that in the past, and some of the other group, part of the group here, we've discussed that as well. So that will be, again, let us know what we can do to help kind of shepherd everybody in the same place at the same time. Obviously, Zoom does help us in that regard, but that'll be critical, I think, to get some of those crossover issues discussed as broadly as we can, as quickly as we can. So that should be, that's all of our sort of active subcommittees right now. Have any other subcommittee discussion, questions, anything that has been presented thus far? Okay. Well, that'll bring us then to the member comments and discussion portion. So do we have anything anybody else would like to discuss? New, old, current?
I would just like to apologize for being so late. I hope you explained to everybody where I was.
I told them you were on an animal rescue mission and without excuse they absolutely there. Mr. Witt, did you have anything to add this afternoon?
I just want to make a couple of comments about what's already been said. First one is the curriculum committee. It's every bit as important as any committee you have operating for the new school system. And it is an opportunity to take the best of the best from what you're working with in both school divisions. And certainly the input from the stakeholders is extremely important. They're going to be the implementers of this curriculum, and your parents are going to be the consumers of this curriculum. So that's an important part of the process. So this is a really a big issue as far as I'm concerned to get this pretty good and pretty right as you can. And so that's what, again, Jonathan, you said that's what you're all about, and it is. So thank you for the curriculum work that you're doing, and the outline you laid out, I think, is very good and appropriate, and it has to be done, and you want it to be as good as possible and get the end product. So I just want to make that comment about the curriculum. In terms of the athletic committee meeting, the discussion of the name was batted about, if you will, and there were a couple of people on the committee who had strong kind of feelings about Covington Middle and Allegheny High School and wanting to keep those names alive. But there also is the process that this committee has gone through for the last 6 months or more with community input, and the fact that this committee, I thought, said you wanted to start anew. Now, I don't know if that's a correct statement or not, but it seems like I heard that somewhere along the way that you were deciding that you wanted to get a fresh, new start on the new school system, which would lend itself to a different name. And right now, at our last meeting, you said that Riverview was the top contender in the new name for a high school, and I guess it would be Riverview Middle School as well, which over a period of time would become the identification name for Allegheny Covington. It just takes time to make those changes. Now, if the traditional, Covington Allegheny, you guys have to decide that, and based on your process, based on what your intentions are in regards to the new school system, and that's not an easy decision. It really isn't. And you have the traditionalist versus new, and it's one you all have to hash out somehow and decide if you're not going to go with Riverview. You sort of have to run through the process a little bit again. You can't just jump up and decide it's going to be another name when you've gone through this process of getting a name and you had this input and you come up with Riverview. Then I think it would be difficult if you just toss that out and say, oh, okay, now we're going to do Covington and Allegheny. Again, that's something you all have to figure out and work it out somehow.
Mr. Witt, the point to that entire situation was not necessarily the names of the schools, but it was just to say that we would do something that everybody could be a part of. And with Allegheny High School being the name of the high school, with the mascot being the Cougars, and the colors being green and gold, we had all three of our local systems involved in it, and everybody could buy into that, and actually everybody agreed to it. So, but if you think that we should start anew, then perhaps we'll take it up at the next meeting.
Well, you have to decide whether you've given it the due process, I think, before you pick a name. That's all I'm saying. You be prepared to say, this is the process we went through, this is how we got the name, this is why we picked the name, which, again, good reasons for that as well. So, I'm just giving you an opinion, okay? An outsider looking in and making sure you don't get yourself in a situation where you're vulnerable to big criticism or whatever. That's all I'm saying to the committee, and okay.
Sure. Well, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Witt, and I think as I recall, there was throughout the process just talking about names and things. There were two distinct camps. There were those who thought we should do what we could to bring previous names and colors and the like together and use that, and there were others that said no, we should start anew. And I, without being very widespread, without collecting meticulous data points and things, I would say that we were fairly split in that. I think if you polled every single person throughout our community, I think you would have found a fairly wide variation there. So I think it's the name. You can look at it two different ways. Some would say the name is not terribly important, it's superficial. What's important is what goes on in the classrooms, what goes on in the hallways and in the boardrooms and things like that. But then also the name does form the basis, the foundation of the sort of shared identity, I suppose. So I think there's plenty of room to sort of lawyer that either way. But I appreciate the work that the athletic subcommittee has done. Mr. Witt, I appreciate you taking some time out to participate in that and giving us that sort of outside perspective on things, because it's one of those situations where I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer in a classic sense. There may be some answers that better fit us as a community. So I think it's time for us to give that all the amount of time that it needs.
I'd like to know why that option wasn't included in the survey when we put the survey out. The survey was pretty specific in what it said, and the whole point was to give the public an option to make the name change. Why all of a sudden are we not going to pay attention to what we decide?
And that was brought up in the subcommittee also. It's just an option. It was originally talked about a new beginning, not acknowledging the previous, names of the schools and the competition, and that was the lane that we were in, headed forward. And then this just came up in the last meeting, so I was just reporting back about the concept.
I think one of the things we need to really get focused on is the name will be something when it starts, but we've got finance issues to look at, we've got curriculum issues to look at, and what the name change is doing is taking us down a bunny trail that we don't need to go down. We need to concentrate on what we need to do, not the name change. I think the survey worked, that people made a decision. I'm not sure why it makes any difference now what we named it. The consensus was the Riverview or whatever it came out to be.
The Riverview was the one that won both rounds of voting, I guess you'd say. And I think, Mayor, I think it's the way this is playing out, I think is reflective of kind of just what I said. I think if you were to poll everybody that you know about this, I think there would be a fairly even split as far as those that, like Matt said, just wanted things to spring anew and have a new tradition begin with this. And I think it's fair to say that you can take some of the individual folks that you may know and talk to on a daily basis, and on Monday they may have one opinion, and maybe if they think about it a little bit more, maybe on Friday they have a little different view of it. And ordinarily, I would be a little frustrated with that, I'll be honest with you. I think when it comes to something like this, sometimes there's something to be said for allowing this to kind of, be processed. And that can be frustrating from a progress standpoint, for sure. So I think I kind of share the overarching point there, where I don't mind us changing course and doing something a little differently, but we cannot, as a committee, keep doing that. If we're going to make a change and go in a new direction on the name, as opposed to what has been discussed, we need to give it careful consideration and make that change if we feel it's necessary. Crystal, did you have your hand up, or was that an inadvertent?
Yeah, no, my hand's up. I apologize. I had to call from my city attorney. But, of course my hand's up. When does it not come up? No. I just want to echo what the mayor stated, and my concern is really becoming that, we're really starting to focus on some of the fine granular details, and we have all these huge pieces of like stereo equipment, right, that we have got to put together, and we haven't even opened the instructions. John Lamford and I just finally kind of finished a first crack at the school funding formula working with the city attorney, but that's one piece, but then that still needs to come to the finance committee and this committee and governing bodies. But then where are we making traction or gaining momentum with curriculum and, the compensation, or as we call it, the early retirement incentive program, all of those things that are going to be, the huge bites of the elephant that we have got to start chewing off of, and it's really easy with these very difficult changes and things that you go through to then get hung up on one thing, that I think we've just got to make sure that then we toe the line, but we have got to start focusing the big picture. I mean, I'll just be honest, I'm at a point where it's causing me anxiety.
No,
Griff raised his hand. Go ahead, Griff.
I echo what you and the mayor said. We had a process. It played out. We have to live with it. If it wants to be changed at a later date, when the school gets operating, they've got the right to do that. But we got a larger apple to start chewing on, and the agreement that you're talking about, that's the first draft. We need to get that in front of the finance committee. We hope to do that next week, and back to this board and committee and move forward. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I mean, sometimes you have to, it may not be the best process, but it was a process, and we have to move forward.
So I would like to throw in my 2 cents as well. I try to stay out of the naming thing because I try to choose my battles, and I think that's kind of what we did was we let that be a battle of the athletic subcommittee, and we tasked them with coming up with a name. So they went through a process where they came up with the name Riverview after kind of getting the poll results back, which the poll results were less than 5%. Is that what it was? Something like that. Less than 5% of the folks in the community voted on it. But they were tasked with coming up with a name, and they came up with Riverview, and now it seemed, I don't know that 100% of them agreed on that. And then, so it sounds like 100% of them did agree just to keep the current name. So I think we're getting in the weeds a little bit trying to...
No, I mean, my concern is we just make a decision and go with it. I have no...
I'm with you. It sounds like they made the decision.
I am just concerned that we are losing time on getting the nuts and bolts that are going to hold the system together done. You could have the best name and best mascot in the world. That's good and well, but if you don't have the curriculum planned out, you don't know how you're going to utilize the classrooms and the spaces,
I understand.
and all of that.
So why are we
You've
so
got
wrong?
nothing.
Well, I think what, it kind of sounds like, at least in my opinion, and please by all means, everybody let me know what you think about this, but why don't we, I mean, I'm certainly open to more discussion here today. I'm not trying to cut that off, but as far as, us, why don't we just let this kind of percolate through everybody here? We can take this back up at our next meeting.